Hi, my name's Dr. Dyann Ross. I'm a social work academic. And one of the things that happens being a social work academic is that everything seems to matter and be of concern to me. And so this is why I'm offering this video, and it's called Avoiding Stress from Bad News Stories. You would know that any of us, mostly day-to-day basis, hear bad news stories and have to find a way of both showing appropriate concern and regard for whomever is the subject of that story, but also somehow surviving and having our own life without being too stressed and distressed from it. Now, one of the other words for stress that really fits with what I want to talk about is vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is when we witness other people's distress, trauma, tragedy, loss, harm, not only other people, but other animals and Mother Nature as well. When we witness that suffering and harm, and it hurts us to know about it. I often talk to my mother and she says, tells me all sorts of things that she's seen, especially on the print media, but not only through the week whenever I talk to her on a Sunday morning. And I says, Mum, why on earth do you keep watching that stuff? You're obviously really upset about it. And she says, but I've got to know what's happening. It's part of my responsibility to know and care, isn't it? And I said, yeah, but you kind of let it go in really deep and really hurt you. And she says, well, what else am I supposed to do? And so, I think this is, to varying extents, a challenge for all of us on a day-to-day basis, if not sometimes moment-to-moment basis. So this brief conversation with you is about how to avoid vicarious stress in particular from hearing bad news stories. And I took some interest for what I might want to say from a 2018 YouTube by a person who I don't know, whose name is, let me just make sure I get this right, Rolf de Belly. And he told a story of how he stopped watching the news on all the media, social media and print media and radio, any type of news, how he unplugged, so to speak, for a couple of years and noticed some really incredible things happen to him in that time. First of all, that he went through a very serious withdrawal in terms of what to do with himself on a day-to-day basis when he wasn't checking his phone for the latest news updates or watching the news at night, but also that he gained increasing health and well-being and from not being overloaded with the enormous complexity and trauma that he was filling himself up with every day. And one of the things he says is that our bodies are in a constant state of alert and stress. Our stress hormones get activated every time we see something that is upsetting, which is understandable. But this can be stories that we can do nothing about. These can be stories that aren't about us, not to say that we shouldn't be concerned and caring, but actually how much can our body cope with and for what purpose are we watching? So his story was kind of interesting to me, as I thought, the overload that can happen is really not good for our mental and emotional well-being, is it? And he gave this interesting analogy that being constantly plugged in and catching all the news, especially the bad news that gets reported, often in very dramatic and some mostly fairly unemotional ways, which leaves us kind of hearing shocking things, seeing shocking visual images, and yet this incongruity of how it's presented in an unemotional way is very confusing for our bodies. And he said it's like an overload of sugar in our brain, that the constant stream of bad news stories just does not do us any good. The other interesting thing that really struck a chord with me listening to his video was that it often doesn't lead to a deeper understanding of what's going on around the issue. So 2 minutes of watching the deeply distressing visual media news, you have to just really stop for a moment, all of us at some level, and think, what is this doing to me? What can I contribute to the world knowing this? And make some choices about what we watch. And I guess that's what I'm interested in my own life. And it caused me to start thinking, what do what do I watch and what effect does that have on me, and why am I watching it? Because as Ralph says, it doesn't necessarily lead to a deeper understanding of what's happening, and it can waste time, it can affect our health. I'm just reading his notes. And he says it alerts our body to the wrong kind of risk that leaves us powerless in knowing what to do about it. So what I thought would be useful in this brief talk is to talk about, and I've written a couple of notes here, I just want to make sure I catch them, some strategies for being careful with the kind of news we listen to each day or watch each day. And these are the strategies that work for me. Now, let's see what you think. So the first one is to deliberately make a choice to take time out, like Rolf did. And this could even just be for the day. When I'm feeling overloaded, had a really full-on day at work, then the last thing I do is sit down and watch the news at night on TV. And it often coincides when it's dinner time, and it can lead to this really not good vibe for my body of watching distressing news while I'm eating food. So I try to avoid that. The other point that's not so obvious, but I know I do it all the time, is I'm really purposeful and selective with what I watch. So if I am watching the news and hopefully not eating at the same time, and something comes on that I know is deeply traumatic and I'm unable to watch it because I'm just full up with my own stress and concern for people in my life more directly, then I don't watch it. And you see on the news, especially on TV, the reporters will say, this is going to be a distressing story and you may not want to watch it. And every time they say that, I think, well, thanks for the warning, and I'm not watching it. Now, the dilemma there is it might look like you don't care, and really we have to make our choices about where we care and for what purpose we watch something. And it's not for me about watching everything and being caught up in a drama or the deep distress of what's happening to a point where I can't make a contribution in the world or take proper care of myself. So that's selective and purposeful watching. So what it means that if I'm doing some research and I'm trying to understand, for example, I was doing this recently, what's really going on in the mental health and health system in Australia, and what's happening to people especially people who have mental health issues trying to get help, then I will go looking, especially when I read the weekend newspapers, I will have a high alert out for any information about Australia's mental health system and especially people's lived experience accounts, because I'm just trying to learn everything I can about what's going on, all the different perspectives about it. And so when I write my next paper or give my next lecture to students, I can be as well informed as possible about the complexity of what is happening, where so often people are worse off, for example, for being involved in the mental health system, which is against what the people working in it would want. The mental health staff, the people I've worked with in the past, are in that profession because they want to really help people. So what is happening when a really big, flashing, deeply disturbing print media headline says, horror story, woman dies soon after discharge, feeling unhelped by the mental health service? That is not usually something I would read, but because I know it's going to be a really bad news story, but it is a story I will read because of the research I'm doing and the deep learning I'm trying to gain from every source possible. So I wonder how it is for you, and are you like my mother? And she gets a newspaper every day, which, I actually really respect that she wants to be informed. I think that's a really incredible thing. And she reads the newspaper from the very first page to the very last page and everything in it, and thereby has enormous emotional effects on her, what she reads, and often not anything she can do about it. And as she gets older, I hear her saying in our weekly talks more and more, this is not a good world. I don't want to be in this world much longer, when there's so little good in it. And I think, oh my gosh, this is an overload of bad news stories. really tilting her sense of the world and her sense of how she can be in it in a way that is not constantly distressed about things. So that's the other part of it, of the three main strategies. The first I mentioned is taking time out, even a little bit, especially when you're feeling low energy, have a lot going on for yourself. The second is being purposeful and selective with what you read and being clear why you're reading it or watching it, and not letting yourself be desensitized to just constantly letting, the news feed flick over in your mind, in your face, knowing especially actually that visual images out of context can be extremely harmful for our well-being. The third method, which is very similar to what my mother has taught me to really be careful and aware of, is to avoid oversaturating on a story. So perhaps hear a story once and then don't go looking like my mother does. Watches 2 or 3 news reports on the telly at night, has read it in the paper, looks for it the next day in the next news reports in the paper, and gets oversaturated with the distress and the harm in the story, and hasn't got a sense of what to do about it often. She has a point of view about it, but doesn't often know what to do about this deep distress, and shares it with me. And I say, Mum, don't tell me. I tried to avoid that story. And of course, for any of us carrying wounds and traumas of our own, stories that are close to home in those regards can be very hard to process and keep triggering us in our own wounding and hurt in ways that can be pretty unbearable at times. So anyway, I just wanted to check in for now. This is about the stress that we can add to our lives unwittingly by thinking we're doing the right thing by being informed through the print media and other forms of media, especially social media, and how to put some sense of self-control and self-protection in how we go about it. So my 3 main takeaways are time out. Maybe not watching the news when you're sitting down to eat, for example, just maybe timing it differently. Purposeful watching of news or reading of news, being really careful and selective, where it's a very, very deeply disturbing kind of story, that especially when they're close to home to your own experiences and when you're feeling overloaded already, and avoiding oversaturating yourself on a news story. Yeah, because each time you hear it, each time you read it or see it, it just re-triggers your stress reaction in the body and leaves your body feeling powerless and traumatized, which is what vicarious trauma can do. So take care, and I hope you found this useful, and all the best, and may you only let yourself see good news stories for the next few days, and may it make a difference to you. See ya. Bye.